Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings. Joining me today, he's making his return to this wonderful platform. I told him he would get a free Dunkin' Donuts coffee as a two-time guest. That's what all two-time guests get on this show. He wanted a shirt, but I said the best I can do is I can give you one free Dunkin' Donuts coffee. He's our neighbor to the north, is Mr. Warren Hayes. Warren, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great because I'm going to get a free coffee.
After I told you that, I looked it up. It turns out that I don't believe Dunkin' Donuts is in Canada.
No, I wanted to get on the show and then afterwards tweak my demands a little bit because Dunkin' Donuts around, at least in my part of the Canadian scape, is completely gone. I mean, Tim Hortons is a juggernaut, man. It's tremendous. So I was gonna try to exchange this for an equal value cup of Joe over at Tim's, and considering the strength of the American dollar, I'd probably be able to sneak in maybe a box of 10 Timbits on top of that as well. So I was ready. But once we're done here, let's get into the negotiations. Now, I may have revealed my hand right now, but we'll have a talk after.
I'll tell you what, I could go for some Timbits.
Sure.
They're great. For people who don't know, Timbits are donut holes, or as we call them down here, munchkins.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Do you remember, or did you even hear about the cross promotion that Tim Hortons did? I think it was last year with Justin Bieber.
No, I did not. That seems like big exclusive Canadian news. I don't know if it would have trickled down to my part.
Well, considering how global and international old Justin is, but listen, they did a whole bunch of stuff, right? And a whole bunch of merch, because Justin Bieber is Canadian, I guess. And one of the key elements that they were doing is that they created what they called during this campaign, they called Tim Biebs. So Timbits, but with a little extra something, a little extra oomph to them. Now you may ask, Warren, what was the extra oomph that these Tim Biebs had over your run-of-the-mill humdrum rock station Timbits? Well, I wish I could tell you, because I went twice to 3 Tim Hortons within my vicinity, and this is to no surprise to any Canadian living within I was going to say a major metropolitan, but not even that major. Just any metropolitan area has a swath of Tim Hortons, like within throwing a log distance kind of thing. So I went to 3 different Tim Hortons at 3 different occasions to try out these Tim Biebs, and they were always sold out. I was unable as a Canadian to fulfill my true patriotic duty of 2 of our greatest icons coming together into a legendary collaboration. I was unable to take part in that and support it, and I still carry the shame to this day.
Yeah, did you consider crying at the Tim Hortons? Did you bring a child along to maybe shed some tears?
I myself shed some tears. I brought my son with me on one of the excursions. He was completely unimpressed, and neither was the cashier. Probably if I had been a petite girl, that would have swayed them a little bit, but apparently it was a monster success. Look, and they have merch. They had Tim Biebs merch, beanies, and they're all selling for ridiculous prices on eBay now.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing.
I feel like they could have made more of them for you. They're sold out. I don't really believe that. Couldn't they just make more?
Are you trying to say that maybe since I was a middle-aged white male, they were like, no, you are not? You are not our target audience here.
I'm not saying that. I'm thinking maybe that the people that were there were like, we're not making any more Tim Biebs. We're done. We're done with that for today. But like theoretically, wouldn't they possess the materials to make something? And you're like, hey, I'll wait.
I also buy into the idea of, a manufactured scarcity, right? Where you're like, oh no, we're on all of it today, come back tomorrow kind of thing, and then you always come back. I'm sure there's a lot of people who went and, ended up buying something anyway because they got there, right? And you're just like, oh, well, give me a cruller or something.
Yeah. Did you leave? Did you not buy anything?
Yeah, no, I bolted. I'm the kind of guy, if I go to a place and they don't have the thing, I leave.
Yeah.
I don't settle. There's no consolation prize for me. I came to get Tim Biebs. Oh, you don't have anything? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we had a like I think it was right before the pandemic. There was a fascination hit the United States of America, and it was about the Popeyes chicken sandwich. Do you guys have
Yes.
Popeyes?
Well, I tell your story and I'll tell you mine after.
Okay, so people, I'm sure most of our listeners,
great content so
yeah,
far.
Yeah, most of my listeners will be familiar with Popeyes, especially in the US. Like, so Popeyes, which is a fried chicken chain, they came out with this new chicken sandwich, and it's really just a kind of a regular chicken sandwich, but it's quite tasty, and it became kind of a phenomenon where everyone was trying to get it. It must have been hugely successful to the degree that if you were going to Popeyes, there was like a 50% chance that they were going to be out of the sandwich.
Sure.
I believe at one point they were offering, if you brought your own bread, you could buy the sandwich. Like they had the chicken for the sandwich, but they did not have the buns. So you could actually have the option to bring your own bun and they will give you the sandwich. And it was this huge thing. And it was like, for whatever reason, they could not keep up with the demand. And so it sounds like a similar thing was probably happening with these Tim Biebs.
Now, did you partake in the Popeyes chicken sandwich craze? Did you have one?
At the peak of the craze, I don't really have a Popeyes really that close to me. Especially they've actually built a few more that are closer to me. But I did during the peak of the craze, I did manage to convince a work colleague of mine for us to drive up about 45 minutes to the nearest Popeyes, in the middle of the workday to get some of the chicken sandwich. And so we did that. And of course we got there and it was sold out. And unlike you, Warren, I totally just bought a regular Popeyes meal and ate it there. I was not deterred by the lack of sandwich, but I never really actually had the sandwich at the height of the craze. I think once it kind of died down, I was able to get it.
Okay.
And I've had it several times since.
And what do you think of it?
Oh, I think the sandwich is pretty good.
Okay.
It's not like the greatest chicken sandwich I've had, but it's probably my favorite chicken sandwich of that chain restaurants have produced.
They see, being the cultural juggernaut that it is, meaning, American fast food chains, we were fully aware of the chicken sandwich war that occurred with Popeyes and then everyone else joining in. But again, in my environment where I am, look, if there's no Dunkin' Donuts, there's no Popeyes around here, right? But this past summer, 2023, I go to Toronto for Forbidden Door, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm walking down, I think it's Yonge Street, whatever, and I'm walking downtown Toronto, and I live, and across the street from me, I lift my eyes, and there is a Popeyes right there. And okay, and I'm sitting, and all of the hype just rushes over me, right? And I'm like, it's the greatest chicken sandwich ever made, so on and so forth. It's the best, and no one comes close. And I'm looking at it, and I'm in Toronto, right? A cultural culinary hotbed in Canada, right? There's a tremendous famous Chinatown there. Like, I can sit down and I can have tonkatsu at any street corner, for instance. Like, you can eat anything.
This melding of world cultures.
Exactly. And I'm standing in front of a Popeyes and I'm like, am I going to do this? Is this going to be like my lunch instead of just going to this fantastic Indian place that, tandoori chicken right across the street? Anyway, so I go in, and I did have a Popeyes chicken sandwich, and I'm going to tell you, I was not impressed. And I don't know. I don't know if it's, maybe the staff was having an off day. Could be a lot of things. Is it maybe, just the fact that the Canadian suppliers for this type of chicken patty, I guess, or breast, or breaded chicken breast, or whatever, maybe they're not on the same level as in the US. Maybe there's maybe we can't find the exact same formula here up north. I couldn't tell you, but I did not understand the hype. But then on my way back, leaving Toronto, I stopped in at a KFC, and I had one of the famous chicken sandwiches, and that was amazing. That was tremendous. And it was I ultimately did not understand the Popeyes hype after experimenting it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you that your experience is wrong. I think maybe you went to a bad Popeyes. Maybe
It could be.
Maybe you had hyped it up too much. Maybe you just didn't like it that much. Ultimately it's a fast food sandwich. I think when it comes to fast food, no matter how good some people proclaim it's going to be, there's always going to be people where it just hits them poorly.
Exactly. So, it could just not be for me. I can concede that. But
I really don't.
I'll tell you, the excitement of seeing the Popeyes and going in and ordering it did not equate to the excitement I had once I was done eating the sandwich. How about that?
All right. So now that we've gotten the mandatory fast food discussion out of the way, I wanted to. Warren is here today because we're going to be talking about a topic that is just sweeping up wrestling discourse from sea to shining sea. It is not CM Punk's return to WWE. It is, in fact, one Maxwell Jacob Friedman. And among certain circles both you and I, Warren, frequent, MJF has become the most polarizing and I would say most scrutinized figure in professional wrestling currently. And I would think if you were to ask a lot of AEW hardcore fans, what is the biggest problem with All Elite Wrestling right now? They would say, what's going on with MJF? And this seems like something, I'll start with this. It seems kind of, it would seem preposterous a year ago to think that MJF would emerge as like a significant problem on AEW's television, right? I think if you were to go back in time a year from now, and a year ago, I should say, and tell us people like, oh, MJF, he's going to have a year-long title reign and he's going to be all over the product. I think a lot of people would say, well, that's a good thing. He's a very talented guy. They need to push someone new forward. That's the kind of thing that should be happening. But wrestling obviously is a funny business. And having now lived that experience for the past year, there seems to be a tremendous amount of frustration from fans. And a lot of it comes down to this current babyface run that he's on and the current portrayal of the MJF personality, which of course is all over AEW television. And since he's been world champion, it is all over the main event picture of AEW. And it does seem like it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem in terms of some fans, not all, but some fans getting very frustrated with it. And I wanted to know, Warren, kind of where do you stand on the current incarnation of MJF? And are you surprised to have seen him turn into such a divisive figure as he has?
Well, to answer your last question, because I think that's the simplest one, I think, yes, I am. I'm very surprised at how much he has been, you used the word, like scrutinized. I might even add demonized here, because I think there's a lot of people who have a tendency to blame him as well for the directions. There's a lot of talk about the amount of control he wields in his creative and and how much is, you know, basically unfiltered, right? Just goes straight to television. So there is a lot of concern, he's scrutinized, but I also think he's demonized. I think it even goes a little further than that. And out the gate, I love MJF. I've always, you know, since discovering him really in AEW, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I was super familiar with his work, you know, in MLW or elsewhere. I've always been a fan, and I thought that he grew into such a tremendous personality on AEW. You know, the way he was introduced as, you know, Cody's friend, you know, his bud that we all saw, you know, where we all expected the turn to happen right into what he is today. I still think that today he is one of the most, if not the most complete wrestling packages out there, right? Let's say we step back a little bit from the brochacho and the, you know, the devil stuff and all of that. MJF is disgustingly charismatic. You know, it's like it's almost infuriating. It's safe, you know, leave some for others, pal. He's a tremendous mic worker. And despite the fact that he likes to pretend that he doesn't like to wrestle, or he thinks that work rate is for nerds, he is a tremendous worker at the same time. And we know this because we've seen him turn out multiple times, and not just on the work rate level, but on the in-ring storytelling. This, you know, for lack of a better term, I know it's the big catch-all, but in the psychology aspect of it as well. He understands all of this, and he understands it because he is a professional wrestling fan. He's a guy who came into the business having watched tons of tape. He knows his history. He knows how the business works. So for me, there's really, I have difficulty finding someone who performs on such a high level on every metric, I guess, wrestling fans look for. Because you'll have wrestlers where you're like, oh, you know, so in the ring, but hot damn, is he good on the mic? Or oh man, she's a work rate phenomenon, or whatever. You get the point here. So from that aspect, the one thing that baffles me with the creative direction MJF decided to go down is astonishing, because he has all of the natural God-given tools to not need to delve into this kind of artifice, into these types of shenanigans where lesser wrestlers would need to get themselves over. He never needed any of this, if that makes sense. And that's what makes it the most baffling to me. And it's not even a question where I'm like, I hate the guy. And I think there's a lot of overreactions that do happen in his regard. I don't hate MJF. I think he's like right now he's batting. He doesn't have a great batting average for me personally, but knowing what he can offer, knowing that he can be better than what he's doing, keeps me from completely shutting the door on him. When he says I'm better than you, and I don't think he means it in the way that I'm saying it, where he's better than what he's doing right now. He doesn't need the bells and whistles of pre-tapes and goofy skits and show long storylines backstage where he's looking for partners, all this stuff. He doesn't need it. He's so much better than that, and he's so much more captivating than that, than taking up an entire swaths of wrestling programming with, well, for lack of a better word, nonsense.
Yeah, there's a frustrating element in terms of, like you mentioned, this is someone who has a rare amount of talent uh, in the professional wrestling industry, kind of checks every box you would want to have. And you feel like he's kind of dabbling in, like you said, tricks and kind of manipulative things to the audience that a lesser talented person would need to do to make up for their lack of talent. And we've seen, like, I think when people talk about him kind of being sports entertainment-y and WWE like, I think that's kind of in some way what they're talking about, right? He's going to try to do this call and response thing with the audience to get the audience to chant something, which is something that you would see a lot in WWE, which is something that someone would have to rely on if they weren't themselves a compelling promo,
Right.
or they didn't have
And
anything interesting to say.
he's really one of the only, when you think about it, one of the only wrestlers in AEW who has, and it's a minute detail, but it goes to your point, that has a catchphrase that he expects the audience to chant along with, right? Because I am Maxwell Jacob Fried, and and he slows down the tempo to make sure everyone can get their stuff in. Like, who else does this in AEW, right? But it is a tremendously WWE thing to do. Just to your point.
And so, the problem is not necessarily that MJF is bad, but he's engaging in bad work. So this is akin to what I think of like an extremely good and talented actor who's been in many great movies and had many great roles, who is just doing a terrible movie or has a terrible script. And it's not an indictment on their ability as much as it is an indictment on their instincts to recognize what is good and what is bad. And there's some real evidence that you could use to suggest that what MJF is doing is not necessarily unproductive. His quarter hours suggests someone that fans are interested in seeing at a greater degree than pretty much anyone else on the roster. The pay-per-view buy numbers have held up pretty strongly with him in the main event. Some of these programs, he is getting, some of, if not the most, the loudest reactions in the building when he's in. The crowd is engaged when he's out there. So you could make a case that while not for everyone, the MJF work and angle is a success from a business perspective, at least. Of course, you could also argue.
Yeah, I think you're about to go there. Go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, you could and you could also argue that as the face of the company, television ratings have gone down, live attendance has gone down, and so while maybe he himself in a vacuum is helping business, you could also argue that kind of the broader implications of putting a character like that as the face of the company has had a negative impact and driven off some fans. And I think when we talk about the hardcore fan circles, the fans who are starting to get really frustrated with AEW, MJF has become the representative of all of those things that they don't like, some of which have nothing to do with him. They have to do with other things that are going on behind the scenes. But since MJF is this very WWE-like performer since he turned babyface, and since he's the world champion, he is naturally going to assume a lot of that criticism. And that's not, some of it is not his fault, but it's also not entirely unfair for him to do that because he is, after all, by far the most pushed person on television.
No, I agree. And there's stuff sometimes, like there's some reactions that I don't quite get. It's not as if this is taking us completely by surprise in this sense. Like, let's not forget, this is a guy who sang Pennies from Heaven with a full jazz band, right? With a full, the Dinner Debonair. His whole first shot at the AEW World title was under the guise of him, Candidate Freeman. You remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if the sports entertainment aspect of it suddenly appears out of nowhere. We know he has a proclivity to this. How about that? But you can also make the counter argument that there's a, dinner debonair and the Kennedy Friedman stuff came during the pandemic. There was the debates and all that came during the pandemic where wrestling companies were just struggling to put anything on TV, right? And just like try stuff to get people engaged. And like, I will never shortchange anyone for trying to do something else than back then, then quote unquote just matches. Because look, we saw what New Japan did, right? And that was an egregiously harsh watch. That period was, whereas maybe sprinkling a little more, a little more of this aspect of pro wrestling, maybe it helped out in the long run, whatever, but it should not come as a big shock that MJF would be into this. I think the shock comes from how, like you said, he's the world champion, so on and so forth. So how preponderant it is right now, how huge of a place it takes on the show, and how immense the skits and the storylines are in relation to everything else. Even before we get to the conversations about how good a wrestler he is and how he doesn't need them or not, there's the idea of how spanning they are. And look, is he living his hang on, let me rephrase that. Is this an homage to The Rock or Steve Austin Attitude Era, where that was essentially it? Austin throughout the show being weaved in any different way, whether it's Mr. McMahon doing stuff until Steve Austin shows up at the very end for the big pop, or The Rock, or whatever is he doing. Maybe this is an homage that in a couple of years we're going to look back on and was like, well done, Sailor. But right now, within this environment, and especially within the AEW context, which is, I think, is very significant. I think this is the thing that's, I think it's not as much him doing it, but the reliance of it that is really, really, really difficult to swallow / irritating / frustrating for people.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about like, okay, is this an homage to like the storytelling that took place during the Attitude Era? Like, I'd be really concerned about that, just because I don't know if like we can build an entire character around like an homage to something that worked 25 years ago. You have to be new and innovative, I think,
I agree,
to move it forward.
I maybe it's in the idea of, and I'm just spitballing here, right? And I don't want to, we're just throwing ideas around. Maybe the ultimate idea here is that, look, people homage wrestlers all the time, in their matches and how they conduct their promos, whatnot, but especially in matches, that was a Terry Funk spot. Oh, this is it's in regards to this match between, that Misawa had. And so maybe he's like, well, why can't we tribute the sport, the entertainment aspect of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
maybe I get part of it.
Yeah, I guess if we're talking about like a one-time thing, that's fine. We're talking about like a kind of the overall philosophy behind how you're presenting your top babyface. That would be more problematic going in the long run. I think I always knew, or at least I thought, that MJF was going to be a great babyface. I think even when he was, a year into his AEW career, I think most people thought he's going to be a top babyface one day, because of how talented he is and how good of a promo he is. And all it would take would be, you turn him babyface and you knew the fans will want to cheer for him one day. But it was always going to be kind of difficult to balance his, on-screen personality, which was so naturally heel, and make it come across as like this authentic babyface. And that ultimately is where I think this character has really struggled in terms of finding that balance. He's tried to keep himself true to his character by doing the, oh, I'm your scumbag kind of thing, and he still, goes for some cheap heat in the ring with the cheating and things like that. But it does feel kind of like a really awkward fit when he's really playing up to the crowd. I'm doing it for you people. You guys believe in me. And when he first started doing that, it was kind of interesting in the sense of how sincere is he? When is he going to
Mm-hmm.
turn on Adam Cole? When are we gonna, find out that he's full of shit? And that hasn't happened yet. It doesn't seem likely to happen. At this point, it would be kind of a different dynamic if it did happen. Um, and so I just think that like babyface MJF has been an awkward transition and has kind of reduced him into this cartoonish, non-believable role. And
Yeah,
that really feels more WWE than anything else. This complete
that's
caricature that doesn't talk the way normal people talk, that tries to work into his catchphrases. And that's the kind of babyface that I'm not sure all of AEW's fan base wants to respond to.
see, and that's where I think you nailed it, and I think that's also part of the problem, and something that connects to something I had been thinking about, where the initial baby face turn, when Adam Cole started chipping at him, when they do the promos in the ring, and Adam was trying to get him to be a good guy. And I'm not talking about the skits, right? I'm not talking about the restaurants and calling Puff fat and all of that. I'm really talking about like the when he was starting off. I think there was something tremendously endearing about it, and that the audience clasped onto, because I don't think anyone ever expected or thought MJF could be a babyface, right? Because he carried the mantle wherever he went. He'd insult 11-year-old girls, little girls, going to see him to sign autographs with their fathers, telling the fathers, telling the kid, how old are you? 11 years old. Oh, 11. Your father made a tremendous mistake 11 years ago, right? Like, I don't think that we saw MJF as a viable babyface, but there was something about the turn, about the fact that he did come across as being lonely to his own, that's because of his own devices, right? Because he was a dirtbag to everyone else.
Yeah, he wasn't
You know,
sympathetic.
he wasn't sympathetic, but now when he tries to be sympathetic and he's like, yeah, and he turns out, man, I have no friends, I'm alone. And Adam Cole's like, I'm going to be there, and Adam Cole, who is a dirtbag in and about himself, but okay, let's roll with it here. He's a good guy in this circumstance here. I think there was something very endearing with it. And then it transformed into the 80s cartoon level baby face, where and you nailed it perfectly. That's when you said, talking in catchphrases and in crowd reactions, right? That's where I think it started to slip. Because if anything, I was looking at this in the early stages and I was like, this is a guy right now I feel who just wants to flex the idea that he can do it all, that he can legitimately do it all. You need him as a heel, he'll be the best damn heel on the planet. You want him to be a babyface, he's going to be a tremendous babyface. Like, he can do it all. And I think that one of the reasons why it worked so well at first, outside the gate, when when they were forced to team up in the Eliminator tournament, or whatever it was called, the tag team tournament, I think that was one of the reasons why it worked so well, is because he hadn't turned full caricature at that point. And now it's a little heavy-handed. It's a little heavy-handed. It's not as natural. It's not as compelling. It's always weird to talk about authenticity in pro wrestling, but there's a lot of wrestlers who are able to pull it off. And I feel like in AEW, the wrestlers who are able to pull it off are much better well received than those who do put on the airs, because then you can really, you can smell it, you can taste it, you can see it. And I think that's the problem with MJF right now.
Yeah. I want to mention Adam Cole because I do think that Adam Cole is like a big part of the problem here. And I don't know if it's like Adam Cole personal creative direction or anything, but I do think that the worst of MJF, babyface MJF, is when he's been associated with Adam Cole.
Mm-hmm.
I think the backstage skits, the dumb NXT 2.0 skits that they were showing, um, were terrible. Uh, I think that the whole Roderick Strong, he's not really your friend, that whole angle, terrible. I think the idea that we are supposed to believe that these two guys are just incredible friends, and that is ultimately the the bulk of where the emotion in this story and this character is going, is that these two guys are amazing friends. I don't find it to be believable. I find it to be
Mm-hmm.
very fake and phony, and I find it to be melodramatic. And those are all things that maybe would fly in WWE, but they don't fly in AEW.
Um,
What
yeah, and I think I think that's kind of it became, as much as it was the root of the babyface turn, and where I thought it was good, very good. I think the deeper we got into this relationship, if you want to call it that way, because I agree with you, it does feel off, it feels phony, inauthentic. I think that if the deeper we went into it, the goofier it became. The sillier it turned into, and that's where you lose it ultimately, right? That's where you kind of lose the charm of it, and where Max becomes a caricature, a guy who's being a pro wrestler as opposed to just being a pro wrestler.
One of the really annoying WWE tropes that they've always done and they continue to do is this whole thing where like these people are a tag team for a brief period of time, then they split up, then they do a feud against one another, and they're really melodramatic about like what their relationship was like prior. Michael Cole will be like, so and so, they were like family. He was like a brother to him, and now they can't stand each other. And it always feels
Mm-hmm.
like really fake. And AEW is a promotion that has largely uh lived off of the idea that a lot of the people on its roster are friends in real life, people that have had decades of professional association with one another.
Yeah, lots of
Um,
lore.
like look at like all of these people in AEW. You not only you have tag teams that have been around for forever, whether it's the Young Bucks who have been tagging forever or FTR who have been tagging forever. Um, you have like a group literally called the Best Friends, who are people that have been tagging forever to each other and have been working in some capacity professionally with one another for 20 years. Even people like Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal have this like decades long relationship, or Eddie Kingston and John Moxley. It's like not only are these guys just, have they interact in AEW, but the audience is aware that these guys go way, way back right to the formative aspects of their career. And so there's all this history throughout the AEW roster of how these relationships are represented. And it's really hard to feel any emotional connection to these two guys who have just been teaming up for the last few months. And like right from the get-go, the idea was that you were supposed to feel emotionally attached to the friendship between these two guys. And compared to all of the other friendships that we see on AEW television, it's really like a flash in the pan. It doesn't really mean anything. And it makes the whole thing like again feel like a WWE trope. It feels fake. It feels like this phony, fake, friendship that eventually one of them's going to turn on the other, and
Mm-hmm.
they would probably have to be together for like well over a year or for longer for you to really feel like the eventual split is going to matter, because to the standard that AEW has explored personal relationships, this is nothing. This is just a couple, a brief moment in time, as opposed to like say like the Elite storyline, which we know goes back years and years and years to these guys becoming friends in different companies. And it's a totally different, it's really a mockery of kind of the relationships that we do see in AEW, and the fact that it is the top kind of emotional point of the entire product at the moment has been insulting.
I I'm in agreement with what you're saying. The idea of it being, because one thing that like you said AEW has done really well is focus on the lore of wrestling in general. And there's multiple instances of these, like you said, of these friendships and relationships that go back many years and that are showcased here. So look, I think we're sort of coming to a realization here that could it be that the entire MJF stuff right now that feels so heavy-handed and that people are turning on and in some cases are just very, very extremely upset about. I think it's because it doesn't feel sincere. And it's weird because when MJF was at his heeliest, is that even a word? At his worst, at his meanest, he was also his most authentic, right? Even in times where you knew he was stretching the truth, right? When he was talking about with the car accident and the moving the girl to the driver's seat and whatnot, these things are not real, but he spoke with such authenticity and reality about it that people called the police department to make sure that there hadn't been a report turned in, right? And that's a fantastic. I mean, the old work is still the new work in this circumstance. So it's interesting on that level to see it in that light, where when he was a heel, he actually came off more convincing, created a deeper connection with the audience rather than relying on whatever he's doing now on these the bag of tricks. And look, I even wrote an article on voicesofwrestling.com that you should check out if you ever want to do that. But months ago, when he was still a heel, when people were getting really mad because of the stuff he was saying and doing and whatnot, I'm like, man, this is what he should do. He wants to be the biggest, baddest guy in the business. He wants to be the most reviled heel. He wants to get the heat. He wants to get booed out of buildings. Just let him do his thing. And the fact that he is, I never understood the issue that wrestling fans had, where on one hand, wrestling fans back then would say, kayfabe is dead. Wrestlers, take pictures and with other wrestlers they're feuding with and putting them on Instagram, and kayfabe is dead. But then when one wrestler decides to, maintain appearances, keep the veil alive as he's on social media and doing meet and greets, and people get mad at him as well, the fans came out and so on and so forth, and why is he being a dick online and so on and so forth. But isn't it interesting, Jesse, that when he was in this circumstance, when he was doing the heel shtick, that he felt a lot more authentic than whatever he's doing right now? And is that a reflection on himself?
I think like when he was a heel, he was pushing boundaries and he's pushing the limit, and he's tiptoeing up to the line and sometimes crossing it. Remember when he threw like the alcoholic beverage at a little kid?
Yeah, which I still think was hilarious, but yes.
Right, but he's pushing the boundaries of what people are comfortable seeing in a way that I think was really good. Like, it's impressive, and it's how you're going to discover something new, and it's how you're going to promote yourself new, and how you're going to connect with an ever evolving audience. And as a babyface, he's very much not doing that. He's not pushing any boundaries. He's not doing anything new. He's kind of doing this, whether it's a tribute to the Attitude Era or 1980s Hulk Hogan or whatever. He's not pushing boundaries anymore. He's playing it safe, and he's doing something that we've seen for a very long time through a bunch of different wrestlers in WWE in particular. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think not only is it not authentic, but it also is not anywhere close to to kind of the same level of his work as a heel, because he's no longer pushing those boundaries. He's not coming up with anything new to do. Um, you know, he has a masked right now. He has a masked, rival who we don't know who that is. That's not really a new or innovative idea as a babyface. We've seen this many times before. Um, we're gonna, I guess we'll eventually find out who that is, and maybe that will go in a new and interesting direction. But at this point, I tend to doubt it. And I think that's a major problem, because I think if you're going to be the next generation megastar, which MJF feels better positioned to do than anybody else in wrestling, you've got to be new and innovative and do something different. You can't be, as a babyface, you can't be reliant on this, in a lot of ways, outdated representation of a babyface character that also isn't a good fit with what you naturally do well in your kind of natural personality. Because he's got his natural personality as a heel. That's why he was a heel for pretty much his entire career up until this babyface turn, because he was just such a naturally gifted heel. And ultimately, I think, and he's certainly not the first person who was an excellent heel who struggled to be a babyface. There are plenty of people that are like that in wrestling history. But
it's funny because sorry to interrupt, because I find it interesting, because I find him struggling as a babyface is fairly new. Like, I think it's really since Wembley that he's really dropped off. As I feel like or maybe it was the transition towards the babyface aspect, but I thought there was a time where he was doing tremendous work. Again, let's forget the skits and the pre-tape. When I talk about the tremendous work he'd do, anytime he was in ring, cutting an in-ring promo, doing a backstage promo, I always thought that work was excellent, as opposed to the vignettes or whatnot. But I feel it's fairly new, and I feel like sometimes I feel like I raised 2 kids. Okay. Sometimes I feel like he's pushing you said this is what triggered me, was when you talked about pushing boundaries. I feel he's pushing the boundaries of what he's able to do in AEW, if that makes sense. Right.
Like from a shoot standpoint.
Yeah. Like where it's like, Tony gives me all this control. Tony tells me I can do pretty much. Okay. How far can I take this? How much me can there be on TV? Yeah, like, and if Tony Khan, because look, we're talking about MJF here, but ultimately there's one guy who could put the kibosh on this in a minute if he decided to, and that's the boss. It's Tony Khan. It's his show. He's the booker. So he's letting all of this slide. He's stamping it. He's giving it the old thumbs up. So if MJF is in a position where he's like, look, I have some creative reign here. Let's see how far I can go. Like, kids, you have to give them boundaries, right? And I'm definitely not implying that MJF is a child and he's acting like one. But it's the closest parallel I have, because I've never been a booker. Although some bookers would argue that wrestlers act like children, but I digress. Digress Jones over here. When you have to give structure to your kids, because your kids will push the boundaries of the structure you create for them. They are going to try stuff, and if you never stop them from doing whatever they're doing, they'll keep going in that direction, positively, negatively, depending on the action they're doing. If they're if they enjoy doing piano and you encourage them and you push them in that direction, and you're like, yeah, go, and they turn out to be a virtuoso. If they you catch them smoking, but you never tell them smoking's bad, you shouldn't do that, or stealing, well, then you'll have to deal with those consequences, right? So maybe there's part of what MJF is doing is testing how far he can go as well in the creative space that he's been given, which feels very large and seems to be very large, because again, there's talk about how that he has a lot of control and he doesn't get a lot of pushback. So again, from my point of view, if you don't get a lot of pushback on your ideas and you have free reign, well, you're just going to do whatever you want, and you're going to keep trying more and more and doing more. and and focusing on making it even more substantial and overbearing in some circumstances than it was. You won't realize it maybe necessarily, but you'll be, because you're just trying stuff out. You're trying to see how far you're able to influence these shows, add yourself to these shows. Does that make sense, or am I rambling right now? I feel like I rambled a little bit.
Well, to kind of play off what I said, I think you could, I guess, make an argument like he's experimenting with what he can do and what's going
Right.
to work. And you could counter my argument of you're not pushing the boundary by saying, well, I'm trying different things. And you kind of have to do that if you want to find something new that clicks. Now, I would argue that he's not really doing anything new. He's doing a rehash of things we've seen babyface characters do for years and years. But perhaps on AEW television, this is uncharted territory, so it's worth investigating. Something that I think is kind of frustrating for a lot of fans is that this current babyface version of MJF is to me, he's, can be very hit or miss. Like, he still has a lot going for him. I thought that some of his matches have been really good. I thought some of his promos have been really good. I thought his promo on last night's Dynamite, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon, so this would be the 11/29 Dynamite. His promo kind of talking about Samoa Joe and how important Samoa Joe was as a wrestler and how he's afraid of Samoa Joe. I thought that was very good. And then at other times he has these rambling long, promos, and Adam Cole's there and he's doing the call and response with the crowd. That stuff is less appealing to me.
The WWE trauma, yeah.
He had the all out match or the all in match. I'm sorry, that was I think really poorly received and really not the kind of match that I want to see. But I think his Grand Slam match against Samoa Joe was quite good. And I thought his match against Kenny Omega was really good. So he's still there. He still has this really high level of performance in him. But there's a lack of consistency, and when in the lows feel really low, especially because his segments are long, they have a lot of time, and he's the world champion, and he's going to be held to a very, very high standard in that role.
Which is fair. And that's kind of like what we touched on at the start of the show, is that he's, his, especially when he was in his heel persona, where he didn't like to wrestle, he didn't want to wrestle, New Japan is an indie, all of that. He knew what, he knows what he's doing at that point, right? But the thing, like you said, his work does speak for itself in multiple circumstances. You rattled off a few matches. We can go back and, just this year, talk about the Iron Man match with Danielson, the time limit draw with Adam Cole too, on a Dynamite, which was tremendous. And there's stuff in the past, that great match that he had at the what was it, Winter is Coming last year against Ricky Starks. Like, that's the thing, is that his work is high level, and it's there, which makes it extremely frustrating that he feels like he has to structure his matches like a Roman Reigns match, excuse me, right? Roman's matches have a formula to them. We're at a point now where we expect the ref bump in MJF matches as well, just like we do with Roman matches. There's going to be a ref bump and stuff is going to happen, and it's baffling. The more we talk about this, the more I'm realizing that I think that maybe the subconscious frustration that a lot of people have is exactly due to the fact that MJF is indeed better than the stuff that he's putting out there, that he can do better. Now, when we talk about, trying stuff out, like, doing rehashes on, rehashing stuff from the past today and trying to present it as something new, it isn't jiving, right? But maybe and again, we're just talking, right? Maybe he needs to get it out of his system to a degree. Here's the dad talking again, right? Send the kids outside to play in the snow so they can sleep tonight, kind of thing.
This is his rebel phase. You just got to let him play it out.
just maybe he needs to get this out of his system. You know, the stuff that he's always watched and loved. Maybe once it's done, he can retool whatever he's doing into the sharp the sharp innovative stuff that we would like to see from him. Not unlike someone who's learning to play guitar and, you know, starts by playing Smoke on the Water. You know, you get your feet wet and everyone knows the chords, and but then eventually, you know, you start diving in. You know, you have to start there before going into some Stevie Ray Vaughan. You know what I mean? Like, maybe this is part of the overall process of MJF. Maybe in 10 years we'll look back on this era and we'll be like, yeah, look, maybe we'll be able to look back at this as the, you know, the primordial ooze of ultimately the tremendous world-shaking run that MJF will have as the dominant force in pro wrestling. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to look at like the root of this issue, I think a lot of it is a lot of people who are hardcore AEW fans or really liked AEW, wanted AEW to succeed a lot. A lot of those people had very, very negative thoughts about WWE. They didn't want AEW to be anything like WWE. They're very highly resistant to any idea that would be similar to an idea WWE would do. And while MJF is not the only person involved in AEW that maybe has some WWE tendencies, since he's the world champion, since he's getting the most time on television, he ends up being representative of that. And that leads to, I think, a lot of frustrations that maybe sometimes are irrational in terms of the direction of the product and where it's going and what this means and how this is the end of American pro wrestling and things like
Sure.
that. Because there's still plenty of aspects of AEW that are absolutely nothing like WWE. But I think a lot of the frustration with what MJF is doing now amongst the hardcore fans stems from a real resistance to a WWE-like product. And I don't really blame them, because I don't want to see a WWE-like product when I'm watching AEW, and I don't think it makes business sense for AEW to go in that direction either. But I do think when we talk about, I think some of the real extreme hatred for this MJF character, I think a lot of that stems from this is like what we would see in WWE, and I'm very frustrated that it's happening in AEW.
Well, because the premise was we're going to be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I feel like some fans feel like some hardcores like myself feel like we're making this stuff up, but no, these were words from Tony Khan, from Cody Rhodes, was saying, no, we're going to be different. We're going to do things.
This is an alternative.
Yeah,
this is what it's supposed to be.
We're not making this up. This is what we were promised during these grassroots campaigns that they were running. You know, the outdoor press conferences and these get-togethers, these happenings that they were doing to stir up the base and get people excited. These are the kind of things that they were getting us excited about. So, well, of course we'd be disappointed. And I understand that. And I firmly fall into that camp where I'm petrified of the WWEization, I guess, of AEW, because there's one product, because I've abandoned ship when it comes to WWE. It will no longer, at least not now, and it hasn't for years, given me what I want out of pro wrestling. And I think the generalized fear of WWE doing so well these days, having a lot of goodwill behind it, a lot of positive coverage. I think there is an innate fear from AEW fans that the brass might hear about about all of this. And when I say the brass, I mean, like, you know, Tony's bosses, right? The Warner Brothers Discovery executives, who might give him a call and say, hey, look at how good these guys are doing. How come you're not doing as well? And then maybe Tony feels like he has to retool things to make the bosses happy, get a better TV deal. I mean, that's still not concluded, right? So I think there's a lot of anxiety that exists on that level. And but at the same time, it's not pretend anxiety. We can point to things. We can actually point to things that happened on AEW. We're like, no, this is, you know, a couple of weeks ago, that the episode where MJF was looking for a tag team for 3 other people to join his to do the trios match, the 8-man match, I'm sorry, with the Bullet Club. That was the most WWE episode of AEW I have ever seen. And you could tell me, you know, Bruce Pritchard produced it, you know, put it all together. And I believe it. Because and I was even out, you know, I went out there and I said, on my end, on my spectrum, in my little bubble, I said this is the worst episode of Dynamite in its entire history. No, but Warren, there was some wrestling. No, but the structure, how it felt. I ended that show. Something that had never happened, me watching AEW, but something that happened frequently with WWE. I would look at my watch and I'd be like, oh my God, there's 10 minutes left. I did that watching AEW, which was a reflex that I had so many times when I was watching Raw every Monday or SmackDown every Thursday/Friday, whenever. And for the show to end and me feeling exactly how I'd feel after a bad episode of Raw, where I'd be like, man, I just wasted my time. That is something that I still have, that I do not want to feel again. So I think that's why this anxiety exists, because you can point to moments where these shows happen. And I think it's fair. It's fair because it's fair to be anxious. And I know some people take it very far, and, you know, people around us, Jesse, who have been very vocal and very angry about the direction. But I also think it's fair because, and I mentioned it briefly, but I'm going to underscore it properly here, because this is not what we were promised. This is not what we were told. This is not how the wrestling fan base was stirred up by going directly to the fans and creating get-together events. And, you know, Starrcade had a big hand in this as well. You know, creating and deepening these connections that these wrestlers had with fans. We're listening to you. We understand. We're going to bring wrestling back to North America, and we're going to do it in a sports-based presentation. We're not going to throw to the back. There's not going to be skits and so on and so forth. I think it's fair for a lot of people to be in panic mode / angry mode, whatever, because that's not how they riled us up. It's not what we were promised. And if, and you know, everything changes, right? I think it's also at the same time silly to think that there would not be, that we wouldn't bob and weave here through things and experiment and try and see what sticks. But the more AEW strays from its original promise, its original concept, I think that's where it creates the most anxiety, the most worry out of its fans and hardcore fans in general, because I don't think anyone wants another we don't want WWE Junior. We never did. Even when TNA tried to do it, we didn't want that either. We want the alternative, the competitor has to be different, and that's what's compelling. That's ultimately, I think, why it's fair to be mad. I can't even get mad at the people who are mad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's always been this sense of frustration amongst fans, even right from the start when Dynamite first started, that it wasn't 100% sports-based. They did throw to the back. They did have interference and stuff like that, things that people were sick of in WWE. And that is always going to be one of the challenges with AEW, which is not only does the product have to be good, not only does the booking have to be sound and logical for the most part, but you also have to avoid kind of doing any tropes that WWE has done. I thought this is a kind of a minor example, and a lot of people have probably forgotten about it by now. But remember when AEW did this big reveal about who was going to be, you know, Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi's tag team partner, ended up being Paul White. And people were upset about that. And the reason that was because I'm sure in Tony's mind, you can easily justify this being a big deal. Paul White has had many matches in AEW. He is a recognizable name. He's a literal giant of a human being, so it makes sense to kind of bring him in as a ringer for this babyface tag team. Like in a vacuum, all of that stuff makes him a good candidate to be kind of in that position to that role. But the issue is the last 10 years of Paul White's career have been in part defined by WWE's underwhelming use of him, in the sense of he's being positioned as a title challenger that's stale and nobody wants to see him. Even though he's not stale in AEW, even though AEW hasn't constantly positioned him in that way, the fact is that's how fans have viewed Paul White, and it's one of the mistakes that people feel WWE has made over 10 years, which was an over-reliance on Paul White and Kane and these veteran challengers that are positioned to the main event that don't really have main event interest at this point.
Sure.
And so it was this major critical mistake at that point, because they're not only the logic is fine. Yeah, I can see why someone would choose Paul White for that role, but he can't, because WWE, all your fans watching understand how WWE would have used Paul White, and they can't see that again. Even though it's never happened in your company, you can't do something that WWE did. And I could say that about the MJF babyface character. I could say that about other acts on the show. Like, even if something seems or feels original or something that hasn't been done in AEW before, if it's an annoying trope that a lot of people have gotten annoyed with WWE for doing, you can't do it, even if it might makes logical sense for you. And that's a balance that AEW has to find. You can't just be logical. You can't just have good matches. You have to also be different than WWE if you want to make it. And that's part of the problem with Max's character. You could say Max's character is logical. You can say that his performance is good. The fact of the matter is, very similar, especially with the backstage skits, especially with the fake, forced, babyface friendship with him and Adam Cole. The tease of the devil, who's that going to be? All of that stuff is WWE tropes at this point. And a lot of the reason there was room for AEW to grow and exist in the first place was because people were sick of those WWE tropes. And to be doing that on your wrestling program is a mistake. And you have to find ways to produce television content that's exciting, that's fresh, that's innovative, and is not relying on anything WWE did before, especially stuff that WWE had done that had been poorly received. And I think that ultimately is not only with this MJF character, but overall some of the major issues I think facing AEW, especially with its relationship with its fan base, that are going to need to be addressed, and they're probably not going to be solved overnight. I think the only way you can really solve them is through weeks and weeks and months of consistent, strong booking that strays away from the Vinceisms that have kind of infected the product.
Let's play devil's advocate here for a second. How easy can it be to escape WWE tropes when they have been virtually unopposed on the mainstream for 2 decades and have permeated the wrestling industry for 40 plus years?
Oh, it's definitely a major challenge.
And just really quickly, like, I myself realized that it's difficult, but at the same time, we still have not figured out another way to present pro wrestling in, than how we used to do it back in the late 80s, when we started getting cable access television. I mean, it's still how WWE did it in the early 90s and Nitro. And like, we haven't even changed the formula, right? Big entrance music, lights, fireworks, gal comes down. Like, the whole thing is still pretty much the same, even on the basic level of wrestling presentation,
Right. Everything is presented the way Nitro was presented. That Nitro template is still by far the dominant representation of American pro wrestling. I would say, like, the way they present wrestling in Mexico and Japan is different, and I would say maybe those are ways you can look at a more consistent.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I've had discussions with people who, when bringing up the, people always seem to hyper focus on the idea of the sports-based presentation being untenable. Well, tell that to New Japan.
Yeah,
Tell that to
and
CMLL. They've been doing this for decades.
yeah, and the presentation stuff, having backstage promos, having guys come out with a mic in the ring, that stuff doesn't bother me at all. I know maybe some other people who are way more sensitive to the WWE stuff, it bothers them. But I would say, how I would always describe AEW to people who didn't know what it was, or kind of when someone asked what's the difference between AEW and WWE, I would always say AEW is a promotion that's largely grounded in reality, where the personalities feel relatable and more realistic, as opposed to WWE, where the personalities are really over the top and exaggerated and cartoonish. And some people are going to like the cartoonish, over the top exaggeration of personalities. That's the way some people prefer wrestling. That's what they think of when they think of pro wrestling. That's fine. But some people, and I think the modern way of presenting characters, are going to be the more realistic human versions of these people. And the current version of MJF is the over-the-top cartoon babyface character that is much more akin to what you would see on WWE programming, as opposed to a John Moxley, an Eddie Kingston, a Hangman Page, even like a CM Punk when he's there, which are much more grounded in reality personas. And that helps the product feel more real. It makes the storylines feel more easily relatable. It makes the characters feel more 21st century. And that's where I ultimately think the biggest strength for AEW is. And that's why it's frustrating to see them lean on something that is the complete opposite of that. But it is very difficult, right? Like you said, like how difficult is it to be when WWE has been the dominant, version of pro wrestling in this country for 20 years. And the reality is, AEW has brought in people who are from WWE creatively to assist with the product. And even people that aren't from WWE, or they spent brief periods of time in their career in WWE, or someone like Max, who's never stepped foot in WWE outside of that like one NXT
yes,
spot where Samoa Joe shoved him when he was an extra. Like because WWE is the dominant imprint of what professional wrestling is in this country, the Vince view is gonna impact them and influence them.
Sure.
I mean, how many indie promoters are there out there that present their product the way WWE does? And those people are never in WWE, probably know very little about the backstage workings of WWE, but because that's what people have been seeing on television for 20 plus years with very little competition, that's what happens. It ends up impacting and influencing the product. And it's definitely like a super challenge to get away from that, especially when you have some people that are going through the product with a fine-tooth comb and saying, look at this. They used the term triple threat. That's a WWE term, and I don't like it.
And to that point, it makes me think of, when you're speaking about, independent promotions trying to run like WWE, like, again, even on that level, you could say, wouldn't it be much more compelling if you did something different, right? And it takes me back to when Shimmer was around, right? When Shimmer was founded back in the day, the idea was to present women's wrestling in a completely different way than what WWE was doing. Like, could you imagine, otherwise, what would you do then? You'd run an indie promotion and you'd have women coming in to do bra and panties matches or evening gown matches or whatnot. No, they were, Prazak and Allison Danger were like, no, we are going to do the complete opposite of what WWE is doing. And, the promotion had a tremendous run, and did set the tone for a lot of your favorite women wrestlers today were heavily influenced by what happened in Shimmer, but that's neither here or there, and it's a whole other topic. but I think it just goes to the point where just try something different, do something else. Sometimes the audience thinks it wants something until you show until you show something else, right? It's sometimes it's just as basic as that. You don't have to always cater to the most basic, the most basic and contrived ideas. I know data and marketing personas and so on and so forth. I know how that goes, and you try to play to those, but challenger brand should be trying something else, right? Remember that the challenger brand, right? They should be trying something else.
Yeah, well, I think that there is a trap that people fall into, which is this idea that presenting an alternative can only get you so far. And if you want to take that next level, you inherently have to conform to the industry standard. And I think that's at some point you see like AEW jumps out, they build up a certain hardcore audience of loyal fans, but they see themselves kind of hitting a ceiling with those fans. Like, how can we connect to those new fans? And there's slowly that temptation to be like, well, what if we do a little bit more, a few more things to appease the WWE audience? Maybe we can get some of those people to tune in, because there's still a million people that are watching either Raw or SmackDown each week that are not watching our product. And maybe we can do that. And so they kind of slowly end up becoming more similar instead of leaning harder into being an alternative, because there's this perception that you can't make it all the way doing something different. And I don't believe that is true. But I can see where the logic is coming from in that regard. And I would hope that eventually AEW realized that going in that direction is not going to work. Especially
Like,
when, and I do think part of this is when AEW first started, WWE was in a popularity decline.
mm-hmm.
It made sense. Like, well, why would we copy something that's losing fans left and right? And now that the WWE has seen a lot of really positive growth in their business metrics across the board, the idea is, okay, we got to copy what the hot product is, as opposed to doing the opposite of what a cold product was doing. And I think that complicates kind of the relationship of what you want to do.
and the overall barometer for success is also very skewed. Look, I know you've talked about it quite a bit on your podcast and on WrestleNomics as well with Brandon, and this idea that the concept that because AEW isn't doing a million viewers per week on TV is a failure. That they're not making as much, they're not even making a fraction of the money WWE is doing, is a failure. When objectively speaking, AEW is a very successful company. So even the perception of success in and about itself is skewed, especially when you're comparing it to a monolithic juggernaut, right? I mean, like there's it's kind of crazy to say, look, you're never going to be as successful as this company until you do as much money as they do, is ridiculous, and is a plan. It's an outright failure for everyone. So
yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, like the comparisons with WWE business, sometimes I even think on WrestleNomics, we worry there are too many graphs that show WWE and AEW and compare the two of them, because they really have no business being compared. There's a brief period of time where Dynamite was relatively competitive with Raw in terms of the 18 to 49 rating. I think that's way more indicative of how low WWE sank as opposed to how high AEW is riding. And what I always tell people, I said when AEW was beating Raw in the key demo, WWE was making 13 or 14 times as much revenue as AEW. Mm-hmm. And that's still the case now with their ratings are separate. It's not like AEW was ever close to toppling WWE in terms of revenue or anything like that. There was just a period of time where WWE was very down and AEW was getting up there. But the idea that they have to be as successful as WWE, like what is success for AEW? To me, success is only defined by, can this product stay in a major accessible way to the general public, whether that's being on cable or being on an easily accessible streaming service, and can they draw crowds, and can they generate enough revenue to be competitive in the free agent market and produce a product that looks of high quality. That's
Sure.
all I really care about from success. I don't care if they're grossing $500 million or $1 billion. Like, I'm not a stockholder. I don't care how much money Tony Khan makes. I just want the product to exist and be successful. And I
Right.
think most wrestling fans would agree with me. Um, and I do think that you're right. Like, when we think about success, like AEW is a phenomenal success. They, had 81,000 tickets distributed for Wembley Stadium. Um, I think we'll talk about this more on WrestleNomics. I think the pre-sales for Wembley Stadium so far, which the number I saw was 30,000 tickets distributed before the public on sales today. I'd consider that successful.
I do
Um,
too. Especially for a show that's like, in nine
yeah,
months. Yeah.
almost a year from now, you have no
Nothing
matches.
announced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like, um, it's still it's phenomenally successful. It can, and if anything, that shows that it can still be successful without leaning on this WWE aspect, or the idea that you're going to need to conform to this industry standard to really reach the fans. And I saw that with Wembley Stadium. I was looking at some old things I had written from earlier this year, and one of the
Mhm.
things I wrote about when they first announced the Wembley Stadium show was, we're going to get all these people that are going to talk about how they have to bring in ex-WWE wrestlers and they need to do WWE things because the only way they can sell out this stadium, and the only way they can make the show a success, is to like make it like WWE would do it, because WWE is the only company that really has run a stadium of this size before successfully. And AEW didn't do that. They stayed true to themselves. For whatever you want to say about that main event, which was not a good match, and it was a WWE like match, but Adam Cole and MJF were AEW characters presented on that programming. Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega, the major matches, everything on that show was still, I would say, a mostly authentic AEW experience, except for the main event. Um,
Sure.
and hey, lo and behold, they, how many tickets did they actually sell? I'm just going to say they distributed 80,000 tickets, but it was a phenomenally successful show. And they didn't have to rely on any real WWE tropes to get there. They did in the main event for unexplained reasons, but as far as promoting the show, they didn't have to do anything more.
And getting us there. No, exactly. Why change what brought you to the dance in the first place? And
Mm-hmm.
look, we're going into year 5 of AEW with, that is on a major cable network that is doing hundreds of thousands of pay-per-view buys. Yes, attendance for TV tapings and whatnot is not fantastic, but I'm old enough to remember when there was competition and I went through the drought and the desire for something else to come up, and to come up to challenge WWE. And maybe it's age, maybe it's the experience, maybe it's looking back, but it is crazy that this company has been able to do what it has done in such a short amount of time. And it is not only successful, it's reassuring. So maybe to circle back to another point, the anxiety around the changes maybe is probably still again related to, well, we got this far without needing to put it on the nose so hard, to drive home the sports entertainment aspect so hard. Why is it that is at this juncture, what is happening right now that we feel we have to pivot when things were legitimately going very well and we're on the rise? I don't know, but it's still a tremendous it's a tremendous success at this point, and I think we don't need it to be anything closer to the market leader. It just needs to continue to be what it is. And I think it's an interesting parallel we can bring directly to Max, where Max, I feel, is at his most compelling when he is at his realist, as opposed to being, the catchphrasey babyface that he is today.
All right, I think that's pretty much it. Warren, do you have anything that you want to add or plug?
I can plug. I can plug with the best of them. First of all, thank you very much for having me on again, Jesse, for being in the exclusive twofer club. I'm very honored about that, and I love your podcast. I love your podcast because you saw my Spotify Unwrapped, right? You saw that, right?
I did not see your Spotify Unwrapped due to my I don't
You
know where you shared it, Warren, because
I shared it in our Slack. You are the fifth most listened podcast from Mr. Warren Hayes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I was fourth for myself. So if you were higher than four, if it was higher than fourth, I would have been like, damn, you're listening to it more than me.
But honestly, thank you so much for having me on again. I appreciate it. And if anyone listening would like to head on over to either youtube.com/Mr. Warren Hayes or find the Mr. Warren Hayes Show on your favorite audio podcast platform, I'd be very much obliged to have you around. I cover pro wrestling every week on a flagship show and hang on, that's been trademarked. On a mothership, no, that's been trademarked as well. Just an omnibus podcast. How about that? And I also do separate Dynamite and Collision reviews. So love to have you because we're all just one big happy family of pro wrestling fans, aren't we?
Yeah, and we always get along, and we're just we never get disagreements.
No, ever.
All right, Warren, thanks, Warren, so much for being on the show. Thanks for all the listeners who've been tuning in. I hope everyone has a safe couple of weeks, and I will talk to you again in the future. Thanks.